Hey everybody, and welcome to week 3. In this lecture, methods for gathering metrics will be explored, as well as different types of data that are useful for collection decision making. Collection audits will be described as a way to improve the quality and reliability of the metrics being gathered, and diversity audits for improving the inclusiveness of the materials being collected. We will also talk about physical inventory, how to make it a manageable project, and why it is a useful tool in collection development. Let's get started. A metric is a system or standard of measurement. In week 4, we will talk about statistics, which are facts surmised by analyzing metrics. In other words, first we need to gather the data, the metrics, and then we will use that data to evaluate our libraries and collections through statistics.
The most common library metric is circulation. In order to truly make conclusions about the collection, we have to understand how and what is being counted when a circulation is tallied and reported by the integrated library system, or what we call the ILS. The library computer system that you use for checkout and patron records and things like that. This is actually fairly complicated because a circulation is not simply a checkout, but it may also include renewals or in-house use and check-in. You know, the word circulation implies a circle going out and coming back in. So let's illustrate this with a typical library transaction. So item A is checked out to a patron. The ILS tallies a single checkout. 3 weeks later, the item is returned to the library and the ILS tallies a check-in. Here we have two distinct activities, the item being checked out and the item being checked in. In this simple transaction, what constitutes a circulation? Is it the circle of checkout and check-in taken together as one measurement? Or does this transaction result in two separate measurements, a checkout and a check-in? What if there's a renewal between checkout and check-in? Is that a third measurement? Or is it still part of the single circulation? So as you can see, it's important to clarify the definition of words like circulation to ensure accurate data. For example, it could be important to distinguish between checkouts at the staff counter versus checkouts at a self-checkout machine. In larger libraries with multiple service points, measuring checkouts at certain desks or on certain floors, it reveals information about the use of the building and traffic flow, renewals, placing items on hold, in-library use. These things also detail collection activity, but these particular metrics are often used interchangeably with the word circulation. So clarify with your system administrator on how these numbers are tallied at your library. Circulation data might be further refined by the ILS, or the integrated library system, to include information about location, demographics about users, material type, and in academic libraries, the academic program affiliated with the user. Are they in the political science program or the education program, or what? Who is using which materials? So knowing who is using library materials at which branch of a library system and in which formats can help collection managers set objectives and benchmarks and select appropriate materials for specific collections and specific user groups. Teen librarians can enhance their understanding of teen choices from looking at some demographic circulation data. Teens often cross into using upper elementary items or even adult items. Think about books like the Harry Potter series. They were checked out by everyone. In our library, we have copies in adult, teen, youth, pretty much every section of our library, when we realized that this book crossed department lines frequently. In another example, if materials purchased related to an academic library's social work program are being used more frequently by students enrolled in different academic programs, other than social work, this is circulation data that's useful to have. Which program liaison librarian will purchase those materials in the future? How and whom will those materials, be promoted to? On a campus with multiple subject-specific libraries, which library, physical building, will hold the item? If legal materials are being used by medical students, it might be smart to move the materials out of the law library and into the medical library. Other useful circulation metrics might point out how many items are checked out per person and how many items are checked out compared to total card holders or population served, which is per capita. This can help a library set reasonable policies on total checkouts allowed, set circulation benchmarks that help them identify slow or busy times of year for staffing purposes, or maybe set goals for outreach programs like library card sign up or renewal campaigns, and pop up libraries for off site circulation. Let's take a closer look at in house use as a metric. So, items that are browsed but not checked out should be counted as used. Most library automation systems, or ILSs, have a module for this metric, so it's as easy as gathering up the items left on tables or on carts or wherever strewn around the library at the end of each workday and just running through them this system to mark them used. Added to a library's routine daily cleanup chores, this helps collection managers know that items were used even if they weren't checked out. It just adds a tally to the copy record so that it will show up appropriately in collection usage reports. In-house use includes browsing and reference access, and better represents the value of library materials which would otherwise look unused. Magazine collections, teen manga collections, and picture books are particularly reliant on in-house use metrics. There are two kinds of metrics. There are those that describe the activities of items as a group. Those are group metrics. They include data like publication date, use, cost, size. They can be used to answer questions like, how are youth nonfiction science titles performing compared to the overall performance of youth nonfiction? Or how old is the youth science collection on average? How does the use of downloadable materials compare to print? What items are more likely to be stolen or damaged? Which collections require the most shelf space due to their size? How does the collection size, like total number of volumes, compare to its circulation? What languages are preferred by library patrons? Other metrics describe individual items, and they too can be included or can include data like publication date, use, cost, and size. Item metrics can be used to answer questions like, what is the total circulation of Title A? How does Title A's use compare to the use of similar titles? What's the cost to replace Title A? How does the cost of Title A compare to other similar titles? How old is Title A? What is the physical condition of Title A? Is it fragile or will it hold up to many uses? Is there updated information in a different title or a newer edition of Title A? What are the dimensions of Title A? Will it fit comfortably on the shelves? Will it require special processing? How much time has elapsed between uses of Title A? Is it gaining popularity or is demand waning?
There is a danger in using the circulation metric for an overall indication of library activity. There is library use that may not be tracked by the ILS. Meeting room use, event attendance, and computer or equipment use used in conjunction with circulation data will provide a more accurate measure of library activity than a single metric like circulation. The Public Library Association's Project Outcome tool can help libraries assess outcomes rather than relying solely on output data. It includes strategies for measuring patron satisfaction, needs assessment, and other qualitative data through surveys and data dashboards. A library could consider how its circulation, collection size, and other collection metrics actually change patron behaviors, attitudes, or knowledge. Those are outcomes. It is much more impactful to relate collection metrics to outcomes in service areas like early childhood literacy, lifelong learning, job skills, economic development, which are just a few of the service areas measured by Project Outcome. And there is a link to Project Outcome in the module. No collection can be adequately analyzed without good data. For collection managers, most often our data set for these metrics comes from the library catalog, or the ILS. All items in the library collection are described in the catalog. It's the main finding tool for both staff and patrons. The accuracy of the catalog is of paramount concern to any library. A close look at the collection can clean up past mistakes. Anecdotal evidence is the first sign that a collection has quality concerns. Patrons or staff may complain that they cannot locate an item, or that they have to continually interlibrary loan certain items for patrons because they just can't find them. Additional signs could be a long list of missing or lost items, or an excessive number of patrons claiming they've returned items that are still on their account, but that can't be found. Even the inadvertent purchasing of unwanted duplicate titles could indicate collection quality problems. A collection audit can help you decide if further intervention, such as a physical inventory, is necessary. Taking a random sample of the collection and auditing for accuracy in shelving, call number, labeling, and even condition can help us make conclusions about the whole population, the whole collection, by looking at relatively few randomly selected items. How many items you need to sample depends on various factors, the collection size, and even the goal of your audit. The more items you sample, the more accurate your conclusions will be. Also, keep in mind that your random sample can be different for each collection. If adult fiction is the largest collection in the building, you could start small with 5% to see how the results come out, and then sample another 5% if the results warrant further exploration. A very small collection might easily be audited in total without the need to break it down to a sample. Break down the collection into as many pieces or samples as makes sense for your library's purposes. Each individual Dewey range of nonfiction, for example, could be individually sampled. There are random sample generators online that are freely available, and Excel has a random sample generator as function as well. Take a shelf list of a collection and figure out how many titles, not copies, but titles, are in that collection. And then figure out how many titles is 5%, or whatever sample size you're using. The random sample generator will create a list of that many numbers. If you have 3,000 items in a collection and you're sampling 5%, you need a list of 150 random numbers between 1 and 3,000. Take that generated list and highlight the titles on those lines of the report. Those are the titles you will sample. If you use the Excel randomizer or function that it has, it just reorders the list in a random order so that they're not in call number order, they're not in title order. It's just a random list of those 3,000 titles, and you could just pick the first 150 in a row. That's a little bit easier way to get a sample. Audit those 150 items for shelf status, for call number, format, and other cataloging information. Errors may include data entry mistakes such as wrong call numbers, misspellings, incorrect format. Maybe it says it's large print when it's really regular print, or that it's a book on tape when it's a book on CD. That's format errors. And wrong circulation rules, like items marked as non-circulating reference when they should be regular circulating item. No catalog is error-free, but looking for a 90% accuracy rate is a pretty good goal. If the error rate is too high, you may need to take a full inventory or a larger sample from that collection. Find patterns to the errors to see if you can fix any process or workflows to fix, or maybe people that can be retrained to improve the error rate going forward. Diversity audits are another type of audit. There's a lot of literature and webinars on this topic available because this is a trending topic, a very trending concept in libraries. There are different ways to do it, but in general you want to determine who your library serves and what the identities represented in your community are, and decide if there's accurate representation in the collection. Windows and mirrors, as we talked about in a previous module, are both important. Your collection should both reflect the people who use it and provide opportunities for exploration of new ideas, cultures, worldviews, lifestyles. You can do a random sample and compare those items against demographic benchmarks. You can also audit specific collections against diverse book lists. Do you have the materials being recommended by professional sources? You can also do a complete audit of every item in certain collections, if that makes sense for you. Most important is what you do with the audit information. You can rebalance the diversity of the materials that your library offers through weeding or through selecting more items in certain diversity categories. Each community needs to be broken down into the demographics represented, those unrepresented, and the collection audited title by title and author by author for diversity in whatever terms make sense for that community. There is certainly some leeway for reasonable use of time and information available. For example, LGBTQ plus authors may not be publicly out, so their books may end up missing from an own voice's description. As you go title by title or line by line through a shelf list, or through a sample of your shelf list if that's what you're doing, research needs to be done on the titles, the characters, the themes, and the authors. That information can be added to catalog records to make finding those materials easier, or simply added to a spreadsheet as a tally to come up with a percentage of the collection considered diverse. Diversity is a difficult thing to define as it encompasses everything from race, religion, physical ability, lifestyle, and more. Intersectionality is also important since people are complex and they represent a variety of identity expressions, Black and disabled, bisexual and Jewish, etc. Our collections should include examples of this intersectionality. Selectors must also remember that not all representation is good representation, as there are plenty of stereotypes and controversial titles to be aware of in every category of diversity. A physical inventory literally compares what you actually have on the shelves to what the computer says you should have. Every library should reconcile the collection purchases they make with their actual holdings as good practice in management and internal controls. This helps create a quality collection and ultimately provides good customer service to library users. We also do inventory as accountability for public funds that are invested in the library collection. As stewards of public tax dollars, we owe it to our funders to both prove our worth and accurately reflect how we have spent that money. An inventory helps us confidently use, promote, and defend the collections we build with taxpayer money. Also, if something catastrophic were to happen to the library, like a flood or a fire, an accurate inventory can be used for insurance claims. That's one more use of a physical inventory. In a nutshell, to do an inventory, you get a shelf list, you go to the shelf and compare what's on the list to the actual items that are on the shelf, either an entire collection or a sample of that collection. We are never going to close the library and count all the items. It's not that kind of inventory, and that is not feasible for libraries. Unlike a business, our stock comes back to us and is forever rotating in and out of the building dynamically. ILSs have an inventory feature, so you can mark an item inventoried anytime it crosses your desk for any reason. It verifies that the item existed in good condition and accurate cataloging on that date at that time. RFID can speed things up, especially if you have an inventory wand or a handheld data collection reader, which is equipment that picks up RFID signals from materials and gathers them into a report. It can find exceptions to what is expected, like items checked out but on the shelf, or items with a different home location, or a different item type than everything else in that category, or different than what you expected. Rather than one book at a time, the RFID equipment gathers up the information in the item records with a sweep of the wand across the spines. Keep in mind that while RFID systems are efficient and they save a lot of time verifying the existence of items in the collection, they cannot account for item condition. Libraries may wish to have staff physically examine the item in the collection in another step. Physical inventory reveals all kinds of things about a library collection. Laying hands on individual items and looking carefully at each catalog record is a great way to clear up mistakes that are made over time. Items may be found that are still attached to patron records. They were returned by the patron, but somehow never got cleared off their record. Even the most careful procedures and diligent library staff can't avoid the occasional slip of an item back to the shelves before being cleared. Physical inventory finds these items and allows staff to clear them. This saves embarrassing confessions by staff to patrons when overdue fines are accrued, but the items are returned, they were returned on time and they were found on the shelf. Items may also be found shelved in the wrong place. Whether staff error or patron browsing is to blame, items find their way to some interesting places on library shelves. A careful look at the items being inventoried will help to find them. They may have been labeled missing in the ILS, so be sure to investigate further before reshelving in the correct location. Physical inventory also helps identify items that are broken, dirty, or otherwise damaged. When performing the inventory, staff should be diligent about opening covers and flipping quickly through the pages of the books. Items should not be inventoried until they are determined to have no loose pages or covers, are in good condition. In audio-visual collections, handling cases and discs is the way to assess the number and severity of scratches and the security of discs in the cases. Small pieces break off of those cases and they allow the discs to slide around inside, which makes them become even more scratched up. No one wants to check out an item from a library just to find missing pages or unusable condition. Looking carefully at each item record will also help to identify items attached to the wrong record. This requires a trained eye and patience. Records and items may look like a match at first glance, but look at the details carefully. Is an abridgment linked to the unabridged record? Is a classic paperback listed as hardcover? Occasionally, one may even find an item that was attached to a record that is completely different, a mistake made by the cataloger at some point. Maybe someone was linking a stack of items and got distracted, linking each item to the record for the previous item in the stack. I've seen this happen. Consider this kind of mistake from the patron perspective. They look up, Shakespeare's Twelfth Night in the library catalog, and they're referred by the call numbers inexplicably to the business section of the library. Patrons are confused enough by library classification systems and online catalogs. They don't need another wrinkle in their quest for information. What about holdings that show up in library catalogs for items that were supposedly discarded ages ago? A shelf list shows a record, but there's no item to be found. It's not checked out, it's not marked missing, it's not marked damaged. It may have been discarded, but its record never got purged. The last date used metric may give a clue to how long it has been since the item was last checked out. Adding an inventory date also gives a clue about the last time the item was verified. If it was years ago, that's an indicator that the item may no longer exist. If, however, the item was used or inventoried in the last few months, it may simply be misshelved. The opposite may also be true. Physical inventory may bring an item to hand that is not attached to a record at all, which may even be clearly labeled discarded. There is no match on the shelf list, so it seems to be an extra item. There it is, sitting on the shelf, but the record was purged and the item was not. Public libraries with adult, juvenile, and teen collections add another layer of complexity. Physical inventory may find items in the youth department that are clearly youth materials, but which are labeled as adult, or vice versa. One may also find items that are correctly labeled and correctly cataloged, but which were accidentally shelved in the wrong department. We wouldn't want children stumbling upon adult materials that are inappropriate. Let's talk a bit about inventorying e-resources. Licensing has become a complicated business for library e-materials. Taking stock of which titles, how many copies, and which licenses are attached could be helpful, although admittedly it's a lot to keep up with. Keeping up with metered access licenses, which allow a certain number of checkouts or unlimited checkouts for a certain amount of time, would be helpful to digital collection managers so that they know when it is time to buy another copy. It can get extremely complicated to stay on top of which copies have how many checkouts remaining, which titles have outstanding holds when the license expires, and even which titles are no longer available for purchase in the same format after the license expires. Digital catalog dashboards often have their own shelf list features in which you can run a report sorted by license type and number of copies available. It details that, for example, a library owns 5 copies of an e-audiobook. 2 of those 5 copies have 10 checkouts left each. 1 has 4 checkouts left, and the other 2 have expired. And the publisher has pulled the title from the catalog, so any outstanding holds can no longer be fulfilled. If records for e-resources are included in the library's online catalog, it's ILS, inventory takes on one more dimension. Is the public catalog accurately representing which e-resources are available and their current availability? If a library subscribes to multiple e-resource platforms, is it clear in the catalog which service provides each title? Which ones are from Libby? Which ones are from Hoopla, for example? Is it clear to browsers which records in the catalog are for e-audios versus books on disc, physical books on disc, or e-books versus print books? Inventory of digital materials is the same idea as physical materials. What is owned by the library, what is its status, and what steps need to be taken to satisfy patron use going forward? Taking the electronic collection inventory example one step further, American University performed an accessibility audit of their subscribed online content. They combed their third-party e-resource platforms for 3 factors: publicly viewable accessibility statements, voluntary product accessibility templates, and accessibility language outlining, quote, the vendor's adherence to accessibility guidelines or willingness to work toward bringing the licensed content into compliance, end quote. That's from an article from Fernandez. This is another example of aligning a library's expectations with the materials it makes available to patrons. It can even help libraries avoid civil rights lawsuits for inaccessible materials. Although from a library mission standpoint, they likely want to do all they can to make collections inclusive and accessible anyway. As always, here are some links to articles and resources and blogs that were mentioned in this lecture. All are linked in the module as well. PLA's project outcome would be well worth your time to investigate further. You can create surveys and data dashboards for outcomes that measure patron behavior as a result of using a library service or attending a program. So not just how many people attended the program or checked out a book, but whether they got a job because they checked out a career book or attended a resume workshop. How are people's attitudes toward or knowledge of a diverse community or a new idea changed as a result of a documentary they checked out or that was screened at the library? So outcome measurement made easy is about project outcome. The Karen Jensen articles detail how to do a diversity audit. Her material is a great starting point for that type of project. The Fernandez article I mentioned talks about accessibility of e-resources. And then the Children's Literature Assembly goes into more detail about selection and teaching diversity in children's literature. Here are some suggested discussion post ideas. As always, you can discuss whatever you like, but here are some prompts to get you started. Describe the steps you would take in performing a physical inventory in any department. Which collection will you start with, and why did you choose that collection? What are some ways you could incorporate project outcome into your library's metrics? In what ways are your library's programs, collections, spaces, and services changing people's lives, their attitudes, and their behaviors? Do you have any experience with diversity audits? And after reading the suggested articles, what kind of approach might work for your library? What steps is your library taking to ensure diversity, inclusion, and representation in its collections? Have a great week, everybody.